Hey legends, Ben here from Life's Peachy Fit Byford. Welcome back to another episode on our YouTube channel. Today we're going through our common movement patterns within the gym, and we're also going to go through some modifications for injury or scalability depending on your fitness level. So thanks for joining us guys, we'll see you in the video. All right, brought a little buddy with me, little helper. All right, the first movement pattern that we'll see a lot in our classes is the squat pattern. And in my opinion, probably the number one exercise and movement pattern that we want to get really good at is because we do this every single day, okay? So a few basic techniques with our squat, okay? With our feet position, we want to stand about shoulder width, okay? For most people, 95% of people, this is the best starting point. All right, your toes are slightly pointing out, okay? So we don't want them either straight or in, and we don't want them too far out either. All right, so perfect position. From here, we initiate the squat by driving the hips back and down. I like the cue of keeping the arms up because it helps keep the chest proud. All right, and very important, we want to try and break parallel, okay? What I mean by that is the hip crease is lower than the knee joint, okay? So getting nice and deep, keeping the weight through the heels, okay? You should be able to wriggle your toes here, all right? And then you're driving through the heels to stand up tall. Okay, obviously for a lot of beginners, they might struggle to get that full depth, okay? So we'll just recommend going to a depth that they feel comfortable with, and then over time, they'll learn to get a little bit lower, obviously depending on their muscles in the legs and low back as well. So we'll go through a progression from the air squat, okay? We'll see these quite often. We're just adding a little bit of resistance, a little bit of weight to the movement now, and allowing for that progressive overload over our weeks in training, all right? So this is called the kettlebell goblet squat. All right, with the goblet position, on the kettlebell upside down, okay? That's the most comfortable position here, and we're holding the kettlebell nice and close to the chest. From here, the movement pattern is the same, okay? So we're driving the hips back and down, all right, getting nice and deep, or as deep as the flexibility will allow, okay? Make sure we're getting the weight through the heels, okay? And keeping that chest proud as well. Some people actually find the goblet squat a little bit easier because the weight is kind of holding them back with their chest proud, and you just want to be strong with the shoulders as we're holding the weight as well. Sweet, all right, after a few weeks of working on our air squats, goblet squats, we'll now work to progress on the back squat, okay? This is a really important movement and staple in our strength program. It's really easy to progressively overload the weight and overall get strong in the movement. So with our back squat, we want to make sure that we're setting up in the middle of the bar, okay? So if Riz puts her head under the bar here, and we want to make sure that the bar's sitting nice and low just on the top of the traps, okay? We'll see a lot of people hold it high, right on the neck there, okay? It can be quite uncomfortable, all right? So just with that, right on top of the traps, okay? She's strong with her elbows, and from here, she's gonna stand up, okay? So little quarter squat, 2 steps away from the rig. Try and avoid stepping multiple steps, okay? Especially once the weight gets heavier. It's quite hard to do that, all right? So 2 steps away from here, all right? Riz is gonna think about bracing her core. She's already set her feet, and then same again, driving the hips back and down whilst keeping the chest proud. Cool, good rep. Just a little tip as well with the J hooks, make sure that they're not either too low or too high, okay? We wanna make sure that we've got that little bend in the knees so we can stand up and it clears the path off of the J hooks. All right, the last movement that we'll go through is the front squat, okay? We find a lot of people struggle with this one because it's adding the flexibility element in our wrists as well as our lats, shoulders and elbows. Okay, but we do have them in our program quite often, and it's a really good one to build up because the weight sits on the front of the body as opposed to the back and puts a lot of load through the torso, which builds up your core strength and midline as well. Okay, so with our setup for this one, we're going to grab the bar just past shoulder width, all right? Loose grip, so we don't want to be holding the bar tight. We're gonna shoot those elbows under, okay? And we have the bar in either 2 or 3 fingers, okay? And from this position here, all right, the bar's sitting right on top of the shoulder, all right? When you lift the elbows up, it creates like a little shelf for the bar to sit, all right? A riz is thinking about lifting those elbows up as tall as you can and pointing them straight forward, all right? So from here, again, the same initiation of the squat, driving the hips back and down, and driving through the heels and keeping the weight nice and light through the toes, all right? Very important that we strive to keep those elbows up high through the whole movement. If they drop down, okay, if they drop down in the movement, then your chest is gonna fall, all right? And then we could potentially drop the weight in front of us, okay? All right, guys, we'll run through some modifications for the squat movement pattern, okay, and some of the exercises that we'll typically see in our program. We'll start with the box squat, okay? This is a really good one if you're finding you've got pain through the knee joint and yeah, you're really struggling to get that hip back and down movement pattern that's initiated through the squat. All right, so with this one, we want to stand slightly in front of the box. Okay, this, we probably wouldn't go this low for a beginner, but yeah, we just want to get close to or just below parallel with the box height. All right, so same here, guys. We want to think about driving the hips back and down whilst keeping the chest tall. All right, and what it's doing is one, it's teaching us how low to get through the squat, and obviously we've got the seat behind us, so it allows us to drive the hips back and down without worrying about falling over. So it's a really good modification for those not looking to add a bit of weight or struggling to develop that squat movement pattern. Another scaled option or modification for the squat is a squat holding the ring rows or a TRX if you've got a TRX. We really like this modification because you can use a little bit of resistance as you're pulling up and squatting out of the bottom, okay? And it allows us to keep that chest upright. So we would typically do this modification with people who aren't picking up that box squat and a little bit weaker through the movement, and it's a really good starting point with the squat. So won't rush through the setup because it's exactly the same. Feet shoulder width, all right? You want to step away from where the rings or the TRX are attached, okay? So we've got a little bit of resistance when we can pull out of the bottom, okay? So we'll initiate the squat by driving the hips back and down, and then once we're in that bottom position, it's going to be quite challenging through the legs. So Riz can slightly pull on the rings, okay? Make sure that we're extending the hips up to full lockout, okay? And nice and slow on the way down, all right? So we can start with the assistance out of the bottom position, and as the weeks progress, we can rely on the rings or the TRX less and less, or we can increase the reps or increase the sets, so we're progressively overloading the movement. And the last modification we'll go through is the wall sit. Okay, this is an isometric exercise, which means that the muscle isn't lengthening or shortening apart from getting down and up out of that position. It's a really good way to build strength through the legs without working through the full range of motion. All right, so with this one, guys, we want to step a little bit away from the wall, so it allows us to sit into the heels whilst keeping the chest tall. Okay, so that's about 30 to 40 centimeters. We still want to make sure that the knee isn't past the toe, keeping the weight through the heels, and then holding the upper back up onto the wall. Okay, and we're just holding. So scaling this one, guys, we can go a little bit higher. So if we're struggling to get down low, going up higher will allow us to, hold that position comfortably. And we're just holding for time here. So We'll typically go for 30 to 40 seconds and then build up to a minute, okay? And I'm just gonna keep talking so Riz can sit there for hours on end, all right? All right, guys, moving on to our second movement pattern, which is the hinge, okay? This one is very important and a staple in our program at Life's Peachy Fit. It's important to build up all the strength through the posterior chain, the hamstrings, glutes, hip, as well as the low back, okay? And the very first movement that we see a lot in our program, and that is a staple, is the deadlift, all right? We'll go through the setup with our setup. We wanna make sure that the feet are under the hips, okay? A little bit different to our squat where we're under the shoulders. We're bringing the feet closer together and staying under the hips, all right? When we set up to the bar, I wanna make sure that we're walking up close to the bar, okay? And keeping the shins lightly touching the bar. It's very important because when we stand up, we wanna make sure that the weight's staying close to the body. If there's a bit of a gap, then it's gonna put a lot of pressure through the low back. All right, so from here, we're gonna swing down into more of a deadlift position, all right, by dropping the hips and pulling the shoulder blades back and down, okay? And then we're pretty much gonna, if we've got that neutral spine, we're just gonna push the ground away whilst keeping the arms straight and standing as tall as we can into that upright position, okay? And to reverse, we're thinking about sending the hips back, all right, and hinging at the hips. Hinging at the hips whilst keeping that bar close to the front of the legs, almost lightly dragging on the legs, all right? Cool. The second main movement we'll go through is the Romanian deadlift. Okay, it's the same movement pattern with a couple of slight differences in the movement, all right? We can do these with dumbbells, kettlebells, as well as the barbell, okay? The setup itself with our feet is exactly the same with the start position, okay? So Riz is gonna set up on the bar, making sure the shins right on the bar here, dropping the hips, shoulder blades back. She's gonna stand up, okay? The only difference from here is when she returns on the negative, she's not gonna place the plates on the ground, okay? We're keeping the hips slightly higher, and what this does is targets the hamstrings and the glutes a little bit more, okay? It does that by creating a lot more tension, time under tension under the muscle, all right? And very beneficial for focusing more on the hamstrings, okay? So hinging forward, plates just above the ground, that's very important, all right? And one more tip is when she hinges forward, her eyes are gonna track down the same way that her shoulders are tracking down, okay? So we're not getting a sore neck as we're looking up. All right, another movement pattern that we'll typically see is the kettlebell swing. All right, this one is a little bit faster pace and more explosive, okay? Same movement pattern, it's a hinge, but we're thinking about exploding up through the hips, reaching that hip extension at velocity, okay? So Riz is going to set her feet. This is probably more like a squat stance, okay? Just so we've got room for the kettlebell to go in between the legs. All right, and from here, she's going to swing the kettlebell back slightly. All right, still got that hinge pattern, loading up the hamstrings and glutes, and then she's thinking about extending the hips really quickly. So she's using the power from the hips to take the kettlebell overhead, okay? I'll just quickly go through, let Riz have a rest here, okay? We typically see people do kettlebell swings with straight arms, okay? It's not a huge issue, but what happens here is you're losing a bit of energy with the weight out in front. So what we want to think about is extending the hips, keeping the arms straight. Once the hips are extended, we're pulling the elbows high and keeping that kettlebell a little bit closer to the body. All right, so if we do a few more reps here and focus on the high elbows from the position once her hips are extended, high elbows, and then we're finishing with a little punch of the kettlebell overhead, okay? And that last position, kettlebell directly overhead, knees locked out, hips locked out, elbows locked out. Very nice. Some modifications for the hinge pattern. Typically, we'd advise our members to still continue their hinge pattern, especially if they have a lower back or hamstring or glute injury. Obviously, taking out the weight, doing body weight stuff, but we really want to promote the blood flow through those injured muscles, okay? It's a really good way to heal the injured muscles, and our physio Lockie at day one also recommends working through those injuries, obviously reducing the load to a point where it's not hurting or damaging the muscle even further. So our first scaled option, this would be for a lot of beginners, okay? Our setup is going to be the same as the deadlift, so feet under the hips, and it's just gonna be a body weight hip hinge, okay? Focusing on that movement, okay? And keeping our technique the same as it would be if we had the bar or holding a bar or dumbbells, okay? So Riz is hinging forward at the hips. She's soft through the knees, all right? She's keeping her spine neutral as she hinges forward, and she's thinking about holding her shoulder blades back and down in place, okay? The beauty about this one, because there is no weight, we can do higher reps. So we'll typically do 15 to 20 plus reps of this with a bit of rest after that set. All right, another modification that we typically go through in our classes is the rear loaded Romanian deadlift. This is a really good one for those who are past the body weight hinge modification, okay, and we want to add a little bit of resistance to this. It does help with positioning as well, especially if people are hinging forward and they don't have a neutral spine, okay, because it allows them to pull their shoulder blades back and open their chest up, all right? So with this one, guys, we'll hold a kettlebell behind the body. Riz is thinking about shoulder blades back and down. Feet setup is exactly the same, and she's going to initiate the hinge pattern by bending forward at the hips. She's keeping soft through the knees, all right? And she's also tracking her eyes down as her shoulders move forward. Okay, think about driving through the heels, squeezing the glutes as we're standing up here as well. All right, and the last modification we'll go through is the hip or glute bridge. All right, this is a really good one because it's taking a lot of load off of the body, especially without doing that hinge pattern, while still working the hamstrings and the glutes, okay? So we'll typically start on a flat surface, all right? With our heels, we wanna get them a little bit closer to our bum, all right? And with this one, we're starting with the bent knees. The width is the same as our deadlift position under the hips. All right, from here, you can put your hands out to the side for a little bit of stability, and Riz is gonna think about driving those hips up as tall as she can, squeezing through the glutes, the hamstrings, okay? Just lifting them hips up, and she'll finish that top position whilst resting on the top of her shoulders, all right? And we typically advise a 1 to 2 second pause at the top, so we're maximizing the activation through the glutes and low back. All right, our next pattern that we're gonna go through is the push pattern, okay? Working through push up, we'll go through bench press, as well as our shoulder press, okay? First movement, push up. All right, this is one that we'll see a lot, okay? Especially with adding the burpees in, because it's the same movement pattern. All right, starting with our hand placement. We want to make sure that they're not too close together, because that becomes more of a tricep movement, all right? With our hands just past shoulder width, all right? And we're going to get set into a plank position whilst keeping our scapula actively pressing out, core is on tight, and we're keeping the hips level. From here, we're going down into the push-up, keeping the elbows tucked into the body, okay? Chest down to the ground, then driving up and locking out the elbows. All right, have a rest. We'll go through a push-up with the elbows flared out, okay? This is a common movement that we see a lot of beginners do, okay? We want to try and avoid that as much as possible, as it puts a lot of pressure through the shoulder, okay? Keeping those elbows flared out, all right, as we go down, okay? It's not the most efficient way to do our push-up, all right? So with this one, we're gonna tuck those elbows in, all right? It's very similar and relates to our bench press a lot more. So elbows close to the body, chest down to the ground, and then locking out. All right, we'll go through some modifications for the pushing movements, starting with our push-up, all right? Firstly, if we're pretty close to doing a push-up on the feet, we can simply drop down to the knees, okay? And work through a push-up on the knees. What this does is takes a bit of pressure off of the shoulder, all right? Because we're not in that plank position on the toes, while still keeping the core tight, all right? We're also dropping the hips as we come down into that push-up, and we're not keeping them high and pressing down with the hips high, okay? The next one we can go through, again, this is more of a one that if they're close to doing a push-up on the toes, all right, but they can't quite get the full range of motion and the chest down to the ground, we can add a little bit of depth into the movement, all right? So what that does is reduces the range of motion needed to go through to complete the movement, again, taking a bit of pressure off the chest and shoulders, okay? And over time, we can remove an ab mat. So it's adding that little bit further, or we can increase reps so we're progressing through the push-up movement. And another mod that we can go through is the elevated push-up. This is a really good one because it makes it a little bit easier to get into position. We don't need to work through a plank, okay? And it's just, again, reducing the angle a little bit so it makes the push-up a little bit easier. And you can also adjust the height of the box. So Riz is on the lower side, so we can lift it up to a 24-inch as well as a 30-inch to make it even easier again, and progress down the height of the box as they progress through their training. So setup, hand position is exactly the same, allowing enough room for the chest to go to the corner of the box, keeping the elbows tucked in while thinking about keeping that straight body with the core engaged on nice and tight. And very important to lock out in that top position, so we're getting used to activating the triceps in the lockout. All right, the next movement that we'll go through in the pressing movement pattern is our vertical press, and that is the shoulder press. All right, from the bar, we can also do these with your dumbbells, kettlebells, okay? And the most popular that we'll work through is on the bar, so we'll work through those. With our setup on our hands, we want them just past shoulder width, okay? And it's a very similar setup to our front squat, all right? We're dropping those elbows through, okay? The only difference with this, we want to have a little bit more grip on the bar as opposed to the front squat, and our elbows will be a little bit lower than directly up, okay? Sort of in between half and up, so we're going to keep them slightly in front. All right, from here, we're thinking about squeezing through the legs so we've got a strong base, as well as our core, keeping that tight. And then as we press up, Riz is going to think about tucking her chin in to make way for the bar going past the face, okay? So tucking chin in, yeah, pressing straight up. We want to keep that bar running as close as we can and the closest path to going straight up. So that was a push press. We'll go through our strict press. Yeah. All right, so strict press here. All right, there's no dip and drive, okay? We'll go through the movement pattern of the strict, pressing straight up. And at that top position, we want to make sure that we're poking the head through so the bar is directly over the head. And we're actively pressing up so it's nice and strong there. We'll do a rep where Riz presses out in front and doesn't poke the head through, and we'll see that the bar's like out to the side, okay? Want to make sure that we're poking the head through, all right? Locking out the elbows, so that's really strong there, okay? Slowly lowering to reverse, tuck the chin in, and back to that front position. All right, guys, we'll work through our bench press as the next movement, okay? This one is a horizontal press, and it's a staple that we'll see in our LP Fit program, all right? It's a really good one because it's easy to progressively overload the movement over the weeks, which means that we'll get stronger over time, all right? With our setup here, firstly, we want to make sure that the J hooks aren't too high, that we can't reach it, and same with the depth. So we don't want them to be too low because you'll be doing a half press to get them out. All right, typically we'd have someone spot as well, okay? And our hand grip, we want to make sure that they're past our shoulders, all right? So a little bit further than our press, okay? Just so we're activating through your chest a little bit more here, all right? Also, we want to make sure that our shoulder blades are back and down, all right? That's just setting up most of the strength to come through the chest as opposed to our shoulders, all right? From here, we're gonna unrack the bar, okay? All right, locking out, and we're starting in that straight position, just above the chest. Same again with our elbows. We wanna make sure that they're tucked in close to the body. All right, big breath in, nice and slow down, just below the chest here. Okay, elbows tucked in, touching the chest, and then driving up to lock out in that top position. I personally like to think about squeezing the glutes and keeping the core tight, as I feel a lot stronger in that upper body press position. Go. All right, guys, moving on to our next movement pattern, we have our rows, okay? We're gonna go through a vertical as well as a horizontal row. The rows are targeting our back, okay? So lats, shoulders, and also our biceps, because it's a pulling movement, all right? So the first exercise we're gonna go through is the pull-up, the dreaded pull-up. All right, with this one, guys, we wanna make sure that our setup is really good and our foundations is strong, because that sets us up for the best pull-up. All right, so we'll quickly go through the setup. The hands we want past our shoulders, okay? That allows us to activate through the lats. Our start position is in the hollow position, okay? Which means that our feet are out in front of the body. We're actively pulling up on the bar, okay, in that hang position. Our midline is nice and tight, all right? Drop down, have rest. Cool, now we'll go through some reps. So once we're in that position, all right, we wanna think about pulling the shoulder blades back and down, and then pulling our chin up above the bar, and then we're reversing that motion with control. All right, so hands past shoulder width, hollow position, elbows down to the ground, squeezing through the shoulder blades. Make sure we're pulling that chin all the way over the bar. Very nice.
Very nice.
You can breathe. All right, guys, we'll go through some modifications and scalable options for our pull-up and our pulling movements. Starting with the pull-up, okay? So the go-to for us is adding some bands, okay? You can add multiple. We like this. In the background. Now that we're set, all right, with our banded pull-ups, okay? I think I was saying that you can add multiple bands or different thicknesses, and I'm gonna help Ariz get the band on, okay? You can do your knee. What's up, bro? You can do your knee, okay? But we prefer to go into the foot, all right? So it adds a little bit of extra resistance to help out with the pull-up, all right? From here, setup is the same. Legs are out in front, okay? And we're thinking about squeezing through the shoulder blades, exactly the same as we do with our pull-up without the band, and making sure that the chin's getting up over at the top position. And then all the way down, okay, that's very important that we're going back down into the hang position, and then we're not doing little half crumps like this. All right, we'll go through a modification for a pull-up. Okay, this is a very good starting point for someone who hasn't stepped inside of a gym before and they want to work up to being able to do a pull-up, and that is a dead hang, okay? With our dead hang, we're building our grip strength, all right? It's a bit of an isometric hold, as in once we hop off of the box, all the weight is through our arms, wrists, lats, and shoulders. We still want to think about keeping that hollow position, so we're building up the capacity to be able to do the pull-up in the future. So feet out in front, core is on nice and tight, and we're activated through the shoulders. All right, guys, we'll go through another modification, more so for the pull-up, okay? If you find that you're having 2 or 3 bands and you're finding it hard to lock the knee out, this is a really good modification to help build up the strength through your lats and shoulders for the pull-up. All right, so with this one, guys, we're adding a band to the bar. We're sitting down, so we're adding resistance through the band. We want that to be tight before we start the rep, okay? From here, our arms are up in front and we're thinking about pulling the elbows down to the ground whilst keeping the chest proud, and we're really activating through the back of the shoulders as well as the lats as we pull the band to the chest. Another reason I like the band is the band gets harder the closer you get to the end of the movement, all right? So it's It's obviously stretching as you pull it closer to the body. So it elicits a lot of strength as you're pulling down. All right, next movement, we're going through our ring row, okay, which is a horizontal pull. All right, with this one, guys, this is a staple in our program as well. And with the rings, okay, we wanna lean back from this position. All right, and the beauty about the rings is you can change the depth and the angle that we're doing the row with, okay, to make it easier for beginners. You're stepping further away from the bar, okay, which makes it a little bit easier on the back as well as the arms, okay. From this position, we'll go down a little bit. We wanna make sure the core's engaged so we've got a straight body, okay. From here, the arms are extended, and then we're thinking about pulling our chest all the way up to the handle, squeezing through the back of the shoulder blades, all right? And when we descend through the negative, making sure that we're going back down into that lockout position. Cool. The last movement we'll go through with our rows is the pendlay row. Okay, this is also a horizontal row, and it also translates well over to bent over rows, which we do a lot in our program as well. Pendlay is a really important one to go through because we're adding in that hinge pattern as well. Same with the bent over position, all right? So with our setup on the pendlay, very similar to the deadlift, feet under the hips. The bar doesn't have to start close to the shins, okay? We want a little bit of a gap because we want to keep the bar path straight to the bottom of the chest, all right? With this one, guys, there'll be a slight flexion in the lower back, but as long as we're activating through the hamstrings and the glutes, when we lift the load up, it's gonna protect the spine, and typically the weight would be less than when we do a deadlift. So I wouldn't stress a whole lot about having a bit of flexion through the spine. From here, Riz is activating through the glutes, hamstrings, low back. She's gonna think about explosively pulling the bar up to just below the chest. And the pendlay is more of a power movement from the floor to the chest. So she doesn't have to control the weight back down, but it's very important that the plates hit back down on the ground for the next rep. Nice. All right, guys, thanks very much for watching this far. We hope you've taken something from the episode and learned something about the common movement patterns that we see in Life's Peachy Fit, as well as some modifications for those who are scaling up to those sort of movements. All right, so we covered our squat pattern, we covered the hinge pattern, push, upper body push, and our pull, upper body pulling movements, okay? On the next episode, we'll go through some common movement patterns for carries, the lunge pattern, and also our midline, okay? So thanks for joining us, guys. Stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next one.